The question of why people cheat is far more complex than most of us want to admit. When someone has been betrayed, the explanation seems straightforward. They view the cheater as a selfish, cruel person who made a conscious choice to inflict pain. On the other hand, those who have been unfaithful often frame their actions as a response to unmet needs in the relationship, believing their partner's emotional or physical neglect pushed them toward someone else. However, the uncomfortable truth lies somewhere in between these two perspectives. Cheating rarely occurs in a vacuum. It typically emerges from a combination of personal vulnerabilities, relationship dynamics, and gradual moral compromises. While the betrayed partner's anger is completely valid, and while the cheater's justifications never excuse their behavior, understanding infidelity requires looking beyond surface-level explanations. The reality is that cheating usually develops through a series of small decisions rather than one dramatic moment, with people often failing to recognize how far they've crossed lines until it's too late. This complexity doesn't lessen the devastation of betrayal, but it does reveal why preventing infidelity requires more than just good intentions. It demands honest self-awareness, proactive relationship maintenance, and clear boundaries long before temptation appears. The psychological journey into infidelity is rarely a conscious decision to betray one's partner. Most individuals who cheat do not set out with the deliberate intention of harming their marriage or relationship. Instead, they typically find themselves gradually pulled into situations through a combination of internal and external factors. Subconscious emotional patterns often play a significant role, where unresolved personal issues or childhood experiences unconsciously influence their choices. Simultaneously, unmet emotional or physical needs within the relationship can create vulnerabilities, making outside attention or validation increasingly appealing. Over time, small compromises, like sharing intimate details with someone outside the relationship or allowing emotional connections to deepen, accumulate, often while rationalizing each step as harmless. Warning signs frequently go unheeded, whether it's dismissing inappropriate interactions as friendly or minimizing growing emotional dependencies. However, while these factors may help explain how someone arrives at the point of cheating, they must never be mistaken for justification. The painful reality remains that regardless of circumstances or relationship problems, the choice to cheat is ultimately a personal decision for which the individual bears full responsibility. Understanding these psychological pathways isn't about excusing behavior, but rather about recognizing the dangerous patterns that can lead to betrayal if left unchecked. At its core, infidelity represents one of the most fundamentally selfish acts possible within a committed relationship. When dissatisfaction or unmet needs arise, there are always alternatives to cheating: honest communication, counseling, or if necessary, ending the relationship with integrity. Yet cheating bypasses all these options in favor of deception. It involves making a conscious choice to prioritize one's own immediate desires over the emotional well-being and physical safety of a partner who trusts you. Beyond the emotional betrayal, cheating exposes partners to potential health risks without their knowledge or consent, demonstrating a profound disregard for their welfare. The deception itself compounds the selfishness, as it robs the partner of their right to make informed decisions about the relationship. What makes this behavior particularly cowardly is the refusal to face difficult conversations or take responsibility for one's unhappiness, instead opting for secrecy and betrayal. Anyone who has cheated must confront this uncomfortable truth head-on. There is no version of events where cheating isn't an act of profound selfishness. Acknowledging this reality, without excuses or justifications, represents the first necessary step toward genuine accountability and potential growth. The hard truth is that cheating doesn't happen to people. It's something people choose to do, and that choice always says more about the cheater's character than it does about their relationship's problems. The human capacity for self-justification reveals itself most starkly in the aftermath of infidelity, where cheaters often construct elaborate narratives to avoid facing the full weight of their actions. Common refrains like, "my needs weren't being met," or "I wasn't getting enough affection" attempt to reframe betrayal as an understandable response to relationship deficiencies, when in reality, these are nothing more than sophisticated forms of blame shifting. This psychological defense mechanism allows the unfaithful partner to preserve their self-image by transferring responsibility onto their significant other. creating a false equivalency between relationship struggles and the conscious decision to deceive. What these rationalizations consistently fail to acknowledge is that relationship problems, however legitimate, never justify betrayal. They simply present opportunities for communication, counseling, or, if necessary, honest dissolution of the partnership. The uncomfortable truth that cheaters resist confronting is that their behavior ultimately stemmed from entitlement and avoidance, rather than necessity. Mature adults recognize that dissatisfaction within a relationship should prompt either constructive action to address issues or the courage to leave, not secretive behavior that compounds hurt. Until one stops manufacturing excuses and starts accepting full accountability, genuine growth and reconciliation remain impossible because the foundation of any healthy relationship must be brutal honesty, beginning with honesty to oneself about one's own choices and motivations. Infidelity doesn't happen overnight. It's a gradual erosion of boundaries that begins long before any physical lines are crossed. This video isn't here to offer comforting platitudes or easy justifications for betrayal. If you've cheated, you need to sit with the full discomfort of your actions because that painful awareness is the only foundation from which real change can grow. The uncomfortable truth is that people cheat for one fundamental reason. They want something they believe they aren't receiving in their relationship. And rather than addressing those needs directly or having the courage to leave, they choose the path of deception and betrayal. The road to infidelity is paved with seemingly insignificant compromises. Regular pornography use subtly alters neural pathways, conditioning the brain to seek satisfaction outside the relationship. What starts as an innocent lunch with a coworker or friend slowly morphs into emotional intimacy that should be reserved for one's partner. Allowing emotional distance to grow in a relationship creates fertile ground for outside connections to take root. These aren't random occurrences. They're conscious choices that accumulate over time, each small decision making the next compromise easier to justify. No one becomes a cheater in a single moment. It's the result of repeatedly choosing self-gratification over integrity, convenience over courage, and deception over difficult conversations. The frightening reality is that by the time physical lines are crossed, countless emotional and psychological boundaries have already been violated. Recognizing this progression isn't about assigning blame. It's about understanding the mechanisms of betrayal so they can be interrupted before irreversible damage occurs. Many people view God's commandments as restrictive rules meant to limit our freedom. But in reality, they serve as protective boundaries designed to shield us from unnecessary pain. When we examine our deepest regrets, we often find they stem from moments when we disregarded this divine wisdom, choosing instant gratification over lasting fulfillment. This principle applies powerfully to marriage. What some see as arbitrary restrictions on behavior are actually safeguards against the slow erosion of trust and intimacy that leads to broken relationships. Protecting a marriage requires proactive measures, establishing clear boundaries against even seemingly harmless flirtations, making the relationship an unquestioned priority amidst life's demands, and maintaining radical honesty at all times. Infidelity never begins with a sudden decision to cheat. It develops through countless small compromises that gradually normalize inappropriate behavior. The strength of a marriage ultimately determines its resistance to temptation. Many people encounter opportunities for affairs but remain faithful not because they lack temptation, but because their relationship provides something more valuable: deep connection, mutual respect, and emotional security. When these elements are missing, the solution isn't infidelity but courageous work to rebuild what's broken. Blaming a spouse for unmet needs may explain dissatisfaction but never justifies betrayal. Legitimate grievances should prompt honest communication or professional help, not secret transgressions. For men especially, cheating often stems from deeper yearnings for validation and appreciation rather than purely physical desires. However, expecting a partner to intuitively understand these needs without clear expression is both unrealistic and unfair. A healthy marriage thrives on open dialogue about each partner's emotional requirements, creating an environment where both feel valued and understood. The path to preventing infidelity lies not in avoiding temptation, but in cultivating a relationship so fulfilling that temptation loses its power. Renowned marriage researcher Gottman's decades of study reveal a crucial insight about infidelity. The majority of affairs aren't primarily about sexual dissatisfaction, but rather represent desperate attempts to alleviate profound loneliness within a marriage. This loneliness often stems from patterns of emotional neglect, broken promises, and other subtle betrayals that can inflict damage comparable to physical infidelity. Affairs don't emerge from healthy relationships. They serve as warning signs of deeper marital dysfunction that has been left unaddressed. Like a fever indicating infection, cheating points to underlying problems that require attention rather than mere suppression of symptoms. The most powerful safeguard against infidelity isn't surveillance or restrictions, but radical honesty, the courageous practice of complete transparency, even when it feels uncomfortable. This means eliminating harmless secrets, maintaining appropriate boundaries in all friendships, and having difficult conversations rather than avoiding them. Many failing marriages exhibit telltale warning signs long before any affair occurs. Partners feeling isolated despite living together, conversations that never progress beyond surface-level logistics, and a general sense of merely coexisting rather than truly connecting. These conditions create fertile ground for marital disaster if left unaddressed. Every couple ultimately faces a critical choice when confronting marital struggles. They can continue blaming each other while drifting further apart, or they can take responsibility for repairing the relationship through honest effort. The window for saving a marriage begins closing the moment problems emerge, making timely action essential. Procrastination only allows small issues to compound into irreparable damage. While the work of rebuilding trust and intimacy requires vulnerability and persistence, the alternative, watching a relationship slowly deteriorate to the point of collapse, ultimately demands far greater emotional costs. The time to nurture a marriage isn't when crisis strikes, but in the daily choices that either strengthen or weaken the foundation of trust and connection. If today's conversation touched something inside you, don't keep it to yourself. Like, share, and subscribe so we can keep these honest conversations going. And if you have a story of your own, or need advice on something you're carrying in silence, drop it in the comments. I read every word, and who knows? Your story might become the next video that helps someone feel a little less alone. This is Marriage Matters, and your voice matters here.